Welcome to ThinkTech on OC16, Hawaii's weekly newscast on things that matter to tech and to Hawaii. I'm Jay Fidell.
And I'm Maile Scarpino.
In our show this time, we'll cover Oliver Lee, an anti-Vietnam War activist who stirred up a fair amount of controversy in the 1960s at the University of Hawaii.
We will report on the remarks Dr. Lee recently made at a meeting of the Harvard Club.
Oliver Lee was an associate professor of political science at the University of Hawaii from 1963 to 2001. His work focused on Chinese foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, U.S.-China relations, geopolitics, and strategic culture.
Lee was born in Shanghai to a German mother and a Chinese diplomat father. Before he was 20, Lee had lived in nationalist China, Nazi Germany, the British colony of Mauritius, and Iran under the Shah.
Lee came to the U.S. in 1946. He took his B.A. at Harvard and his Ph.D. at the University of Chicago. He has published journal articles in English and Chinese. In 2014, he published his memoir titled Oliver's Travels, The Making of a Chinese-American Radical.
After college, Lee's liberal democratic roots turned into anti-war activism. By the 1960s, having spent a decade studying international relations, Lee began to build his case against U.S. foreign policy.
In the war, he sided with the Viet Cong, admiring their revolutionary optimism and decrying U.S. imperialism. He helped found the Hawaii Committee to End the War in Vietnam. That group held protests and burned Lyndon Johnson in effigy.
By 1968, opposition to the Vietnam War was growing on campuses across the U.S.
Lee had been offered tenure, but then an anti-war student group for which he was the advisor published a flyer urging students to infiltrate the military and eliminate officers. When the UH administration learned of this, they revoked Lee's tenure.
When the Board of Regents moved to fire Lee in April 1968, Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, and the Associated Students of UH organized a sit-in at Bachman Hall, the UH administrative building.
Some 150 students and faculty occupied Bachman Hall to protest and demonstrate support for Lee. 2 days later, 120 of them were arrested. This triggered an even larger sit-in.
The 10 days of protests did not cause Lee's reinstatement, but it led to the formation of a student-faculty union and the continuation of the controversy in the following semester.
Threatened by censure and a loss of national accreditation by the Association of American University Professors, and by continued student and faculty pressure, the Regents reinstated Lee, and UH President Thomas Hamilton resigned.
Some say that these events established academic freedom as a living principle at UH.
Here are portions of the footage we took of Oliver Lee's comments when he spoke at the Harvard Club a few weeks ago.
Father and mother, they had met in Berlin in 1922 and married in Paris. They went to China, and I was born in Shanghai on Pearl Harbor Day, 1925. That's me and my nanny. At age 4, my mother split from my father, and she went back to Germany, took me with her. I lived in Germany for some 7 years, Nazi flags, but some hammer and sickle. You see one quite clearly on the left is my mother, me in school. I'm in the second row, black hair. Oh, yeah. Yeah, near the center. Now, in the back row, second from the right, is a blonde boy, and he happened to be American, and we were good friends. I'm in a brown shirt in the back row, and I was trying to join the Hitler Youth. And they didn't want to take me. So. The American boy is standing, and he's the front of the camel. That's me and one of my uncles. I use the German, yeah. Now, my father was sending money to my mother. He was hoping that she would change her mind and come back to China. So he was demanding that, you see, he saw war coming in Europe. So he wanted me to be sent out of trouble, yeah? And I arrived in China in February 37, and there's me and my stepmother. Within 5 months of my arrival, the Japanese are invading big time. So my father got me into that kind of trouble. Then he sent me and my stepmother and my half-brother to his native village, which is this one. And he said, well, the Japanese, they're going to take all the eastern cities, but they don't have enough troops to occupy the country, most of the countryside. So true enough, they never did get to our area. A couple of pictures about my father's he had studied sculpture in Paris, so he did a couple of major statues in China. This is the General so-and-so, Deng Zhongyuan. And I remember seeing it outside the train station in Canton, main train station. But in '72, my first return trip, I looked for it and it wasn't there. Father and family left Canton on the eve of the capture, yeah. He sends me to live with his two brothers in Mauritius, which is an island in the Indian Ocean. He had, as I said, he had two brothers there, so they had a joint household, and they each had about 10 children. It was a huge household, so I had plenty of cousins. I lived there for 7 years. I'm in the back row, third from your left, and the man in the dark suit in the center is my uncle, number one uncle. He was the principal of the school. We were Boy Scouts, Chinese Boy Scouts. I'm on the far left there, as usual. Yeah, we're on the mountain peak. I'm in the front and center. On the far left is the man who joined during the Korean War. He had gone back to China. He served in the Chinese Air Force until they got fed up with essentially the political turmoil in the Great Leap Forward period, or in the Cultural Revolution period, and they went out to Hong Kong and had to pass the medical exam in Hong Kong because they didn't accept the Chinese certificate. Father gets stationed in the Chinese embassy as a chargé d'affaires. I joined them there after the war is over. And I'm in Tehran in an American Presbyterian missionary school. Classmates, yeah, as it says, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Russia, Hungary, Germany, Greece. Hannah Skalova, yeah. The school only had 10 grades. I was in the 10th grade. Hannah was in the 9th grade. But at the same time, I went to America, and she and her parents went to Czechoslovakia. We had lost touch at the time when Czechoslovakia became communist. But 55 years later, I was able to contact her. We corresponded again. She was very happy to connect again. She had no connection with the rest of our schoolmates. But 2 years later, she died, and I was awfully sorry. I'm an American Boy Scout. The guy on our far right, the short little guy, but I got you, and I was a strong boy. I pinned down a 6-foot tall Russian classmate, but this guy was stronger than I. Year after year after year, these schoolmates would come to America. So I went to high school in one year. I skipped the 11th grade because, you know, when I had gone from Germany to China at age 11, I was in gymnasium in Germany, which begins at the fifth grade level. But in China, I didn't know any Chinese except for my family name. So they demoted me to the 2nd grade. So I lost years in that way. So now, but you see, my schoolmate, this one here, he was in the 11th grade. We call them Chao Zhu Qi, but in Mandarin today it is called Ji Chao Zhu. And he was a communist. And his oldest brother, who was 20 years older, was a friend of Zhou Enlai, Premier Zhou Enlai, and was a communist working in New York, his older brother. So I went to Harvard in '47. Chao Chu came a year later. He became the chief interpreter for Mao Zedong. He began in the Korean War as an interpreter in the armistice negotiation, and also interpreted for Deng Xiaoping. Yeah, 3 years at Harvard. I think I mentioned I accelerated, got happily married. One of my nephews. At Harvard, I had attended a guest lecture by this man, Owen Lattimore. And he was so brilliant, so persuasive, and so learned. He was a top China scholar. And his main book was The Inner Asian Frontiers of China. So I admired him, and I said to myself, okay, someday I'm going to study under him. And there's Lattimore near the center, testifying in the McCarran Committee of Internal Security. And for 12 consecutive days, they battered him, and they got the Justice Department to. They couldn't pin anything on him, but they got the Justice Department to prosecute him for perjury. But that was thrown out of court. Even though he was cleared, still Johns Hopkins didn't treat him right. They treated him shabbily. So after some years later, he left for England. And I took my family to Chicago, to the University of Chicago. This man is a famous professor at the University of Chicago, Hans Morgenthau. He was a leading advocate, one of a handful of advocates of realism in the study and conduct of foreign policy. Then after 5 years in Chicago, I went with my first job as instructor at the University of Maryland. Dissertation not finished yet, but I needed a job. So here I'm meeting some left-leaning American graduate students, except one of them is an Indian. And we had discussion groups, and we were cheering for Fidel Castro, okay. And, I started out because of parental influence, anti-communist, pro-Chiang Kai-shek, pro-Chinese nationalist party. But over the years, with different kinds of influences on me, I became radical. I'm reading J. Edgar Hoover's book, subtitle, What the Communist Bosses Are Doing Now to Bring America to Its Knees. He committed himself to really expose the Communist Party, but there was nothing there. So I'm criticizing Hoover in class. And some of my students, I was also teaching full-time at College Park, Maryland, but also some evenings at military bases, and there's several of them in Maryland. Some of my students wrote to the FBI. Oh, this professor of mine, he was born in China, and he's clearly anti-American, and so on. He shouldn't be teaching, and etc. So the FBI started a file on me. Okay, now Ralph Meva was in the political science department at UH Manoa. Ralph and I had been classmates at Johns Hopkins. So I ran into him. I was looking for a job, and he says, Oliver, it so happens that I'm on leave of absence from the political, in Hawaii, and so there's a job there if you want to take it. But it's only 1 year. I said, okay, I need a job. So, okay, it's soon after getting to Hawaii that you have this part of world history. This monk burned himself to death. Johnson was president, and it looked to me as if America was going to get into the war. And I'm saying our war in South Vietnam is militarily hopeless, diplomatically counterproductive, and humanly and economically wasteful and morally repugnant. It happened to be covered in the newspaper, and the community from that day on, they knew that there was a troublemaker at UH Manoa. Taking part in our demonstrations, we had a committee to end the war in Vietnam. So he joined us. And next to him is Charlie Fujimoto and Eileen Fujimoto, 7 of them. They were cleared by the Ninth Circuit Court. 65 in the summer, I went to Tokyo to take part in this international conference. I have several slides about the Vietnam War. The idea was to destroy one square mile at a time, 1 square mile per day. President Johnson was speaking at the Kennedy Theater, so we prepared this scaffolding as a symbolic hanging of Johnson. The man on the lower right, he's carrying a flag. That's a Viet Cong flag, and he's wearing black pajamas. Napalm bombing. This is part of a result of the My Lai massacre, March '68. 400 civilians. Just incredible. Because I was in public already opposing the American war, Hamilton was under pressure from the outside. So he resisted at first, but a year later he caved in. My chairman in political science, he and the incoming chairman went to see President Hamilton, and as I say, he found him, that man was incompetent, found him grossly misinformed about my alleged misconduct. Specifically, he says, well, I in terms of faculty behavior, I draw the line at illegal action. And Oliver Lee knew that when he gave advice to the student group, of which he was faculty advisor, he knew that the statement that the students had prepared, he knew that the statement was illegal, so therefore he was condoning illegal behavior. My chairman, he says, hey, there's no such thing. Oliver Lee didn't approve of the statement. So what are you talking about? But he should have known it was illegal. Because he turned out to be wrong, because the Justice Department rejected the Hawaii's attempt, the Attorney General from Hawaii, attempt to find me guilty of violating the Smith Act. We had a faculty senate committee. They studied the issue, they studied the rationale that Hamilton had used to fire me. So we had the faculty senate on our side, and President Hamilton says, well, I've lost the confidence of my faculty, and being president of a university is a difficult job in the best of times, but now I cannot serve. But I will stay until you find a successor. Okay, so he remained president. And the advertiser defined it in terms of personalities, which was the wrong way of looking at it. This is outside of Iolani Palace. So we're chanting, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? There were about 5,000 people out there. Wow. Students begin occupation of Bachman Hall. They tried to hoist this lady up there and never made it. Policemen holding onto her ankle. The students are demanding Dr. Lee's letter of intent to grant tenure be restored. You see, the dean had given me that letter, which is a promise, okay? 1 year from today, you will have tenure. That's the letter of intent. And that's the letter that the president retracted. He canceled the validity of the letter. And 132 policemen, imagine that, including the chief. Then the next day, we're out there outside Bachman Hall. The Board of Regents show up to face the students, to face the music. And they announce their final decision. He said, President Hamilton's resignation will be effective as of today. I mean, they threw him under the bus. They had supported him, about his firing Oliver Lee. But now they found it opportune to boot him out that day, as of today. But Professor Lee will have his terminal year in 68, 69. He will not be teaching. He'll receive 1 year's severance pay. Now, Stam Slom, interesting. He's of course a state senator today, and has been for quite a few years. Back then, he was a student at UH, I'm pretty sure, and he was head of the Young Americans for Freedom. He organized a debate between me and Buckley, and he packed McKinley Auditorium. The audience included Claire Booth Luce in the front row, and Admiral McCain, the head of SINGPAC, also next to her. William Buckley, a leading intellectual. But his performance was so poor. He had come back from Vietnam, but said nothing about Vietnam, and nothing much about anything else. And so ineffectual that the local media, the local editors, criticized them for his non-performance, for having nothing to say. Harlan Cleveland was a successor to Hamilton. He said, well, the job is attractive, but I cannot accept the job unless the Oliver Lee case is solved in accordance with the requirements of the American Association of University Professors. And it happened. The AAUP put the pressure on the regents. And Steve was one of the diehards on the Board of Regents. very, very from AMFAC. So the regents did reverse themselves, vote of 5-2 to reinstate me. So the Lee case is settled, and I took some of that money, the severance pay, and took my family to the whole summer, Southeast Asia and Japan. Yeah, they reinstated me, and I taught for about 30 more years after reinstatement. I retired in 2001. But my department likes me. I have an office space there. This is the kind of space that graduate teaching assistants do get. You know, I have one of those. I go in every day.
Well, I thought it was absolutely wonderful because it just touched on so many things in the lives of many of us that may be too young to have experienced those things, but you hear the names, and then for those of us that are older, you remember the people and you remember the stories in the paper, both locally and nationally, and the history and the culture is just was just absolutely wonderful.
I'm just blown away. He was so right about so many things, and in retrospect, but of course he knew it at the time. It took me a long time to get with the program. I was absolutely mesmerized by his talk and by the memories he brought up of people and occurrences and events that I had forgotten about.
The extraordinary way that he was confronted on the UH campus back in the late 60s, I wasn't here quite then, I came in the 80s, by these die-hard conservatives who supported Dr. Hamilton at the university and would hear nothing of his distaste for the horror which was going on in Vietnam. And that confrontation was absolutely extraordinary.
Lee's book, Oliver's Travels, is a powerful account of his transformation from a complacent liberal into a radical activist.
If you want to know more about political radicalization, bicultural experience and critical consciousness, the role of academics in social movements, academic freedom in Hawaii, or about Oliver Lee himself, it's an interesting read.
And now let's take a look at our ThinkTech calendar of events going forward.
ThinkTech broadcasts its talk shows live on the internet from noon to 5 p.m. every weekday afternoon. If you missed a show or want to replay or share any show, they're all archived on YouTube.
Visit thinktechhawaii.com for our live stream and YouTube links, or to join our email list and get these links and program advisories on our upcoming shows.
We also invite you to be part of our live audience at our downtown studio in Pioneer Plaza. Contact me, Jay, at thinktechhawaii.com. Raise your awareness in every way on ThinkTech.
After the holidays, ThinkTech will resume its monthly lunch and panel programs on Thursday, January 22nd at the downtown Laniakea YWCA.
The panel that day will discuss the status of scientific research in Hawaii. It will feature a number of scientific researchers at the university who also mentor the kids in the State Science Fair this March. Our partner in the program is the Hawaii Academy of Science.
Come join us and meet the scientists, the members of the Academy, and the kids they mentor. Be a part of science in Hawaii, at least for lunch. For further details and to sign up to attend the program, visit thinktechhawaii.com. We'll be right back to wrap up this week's edition of ThinkTech. But first, we want to thank our underwriters.
Okay, Miley, that wraps up this week's edition of ThinkTech. Remember, you can watch ThinkTech on OC16 several times every week. Can't get enough of it, just like Duke Oishi does. For additional times, check out OC16.tv.
Definitively, Jay. For lots more ThinkTech videos and for underwriting and sponsorship opportunities on ThinkTech on OC16, visit thinktechhawaii.com. Be a guest or a volunteer, a producer or intern, and help us reach Hawaii.
Thanks so much for joining us on ThinkTech and for supporting tech, energy diversification, and globalism in Hawaii. You can watch this show throughout the week and tune in next Sunday evening for our next important weekly episode. I'm Jay Fidell.
I'm Maile Scarpino. Aloha, everyone.